Hey, it's Jess. Welcome back. Today I'm here with my August wrap up where I will be talking about all the books that I read in August of 2024. Looking at my story graph, I read a total of 10 books, which equaled out to be 3,771 pages. It looks like the average time for me to finish a book was 13 days. Looking at the moods, nothing surprising, dark, tense, mysterious. That's, again, usually what I read. I did read 2 nonfiction books this month and read 8 fiction books, so I'm happy that I was able to get some nonfiction back in there. I do like to try to read nonfiction books that I don't always get to them every month. Genre, no surprise, the top one is horror. A little surprising, the second one is young adult. I didn't think I read that many young adult books this month, but apparently I did. As far as the format goes, 5 of the books I read were physical books, 2 were digital ebooks, and 3 of them were audiobooks. I had an average star rating of 4.19. I had 2 books with no rating, 6 4-star books, 1 4.5-star book, and 1 5-star book. Always like when you can get a 5-star book in a month. And now let's talk about the books I read. Before I get started talking about the books, I did pull the slip of paper for Dungeons and Drama for my August TBR. I did not end up getting to that book, so I have the slip of paper and I'm putting it back in my TBR jar to pull again. I don't know when. Starting with the books that I did not rate, they were both nonfiction books. And again, I tend not to rate nonfiction books and I really feel compelled to, which I don't usually. The first nonfiction book I read was The Knowledge Gap by Natalie Wexler. I read this as part of a book study for work. There were several of us that read this book together. It is about like teaching reading and how we teach reading as a society now compared to how it used to be taught, and basically like kind of how we're doing it wrong. It's not exactly what it is. It's a book about reading instruction practices and how they've changed over the years, and it has some ideas of how they can continue to change. The next nonfiction book I read was Green Lights by Matthew McConaughey. This is his autobiography memoir. Man, Matthew McConaughey is such a strange person. And nothing against him. I enjoyed this book. I listened to it as an audiobook. He does narrate it himself. I think that's the way to read this if you're going to read it, is listen to it. I listen to my audiobooks at usually 1.75 speed. I don't really like it when people talk slow, and I find audiobooks to be too slow for me. And I actually had to slow this one down. Matthew McConaughey talks so quickly. I listened to this at 1.5 because I just wasn't absorbing it at the rate that I normally listen to audiobooks as. It was just such a fun, strange, quirky book. I was talking to my friend about it. She had read it last year, and so I had it on hold at the library, and it finally came up as available. And so I was like, I'm at this part. This is so weird. This is, I don't know. It was full of good advice. It was talking about seeing the green lights in your life. That's, a green light tells you to go. And so it's looking in your life and looking for those signs basically that you have, that you should be going and continuing what you're doing. But overall, it was fun. I always like a good autobiography, and this one was really enjoyable. The first 4-star book I read was Blood Scion by Deborah Falaye, I believe is how you say her last name. This is a book that I actually picked out of the TBR jar for July, and I had started reading it in July, but I didn't end up finishing it until August. So I do have the slip because I pulled the slip from the jar in July. And so now we're going to put it in here. These are the books that I have pulled out of my TBR jar and have actually read. And so I put the slips of paper in here. It's starting to get full. I do know that there are some slips in here in my TBR jar that I need to pull because I have read the books and I didn't read them because I pulled them. I read them for readathons and things like that. So there should be more in here. And hopefully one day soon I will go through here and take out the books that have been read and put them in here. That was a super long explanation. Anyway, back to the book, Blood Scion. This is a young adult fantasy book. You are following Sloane. She has been drafted to be a child warrior. That's very common in her area. The kingdom is fighting against things called scions, which are people with magical powers. And what they don't know is Sloane is actually a scion. So she's been recruited to the army, but she has to keep herself hidden and her powers hidden. Otherwise she will be executed. It, I believe, is just a duology. I know there's at least one more book. I'm not sure if there's going to be a third one. I really enjoyed this one. I did end up listening to it as an audiobook as well as reading alongside it, just because I needed an audiobook at the time to read, because I read audiobooks, or I listen to audiobooks like while I'm working out and driving and things like that. And I needed an audiobook, and I found the audio for this one. My next 4-star book was Tastes Like Candy by Ivy Tholen. I read this book for the Buzzword Readathon that's hosted by Books and Lala here on YouTube. The prompt for August was a book with the word like in the title. And a lot of the other ones I had already read and didn't want to reread. And then I remembered Tastes Like Candy, and so I picked this one up. This is a young adult. Now I'm starting to remember why young adult was the second highest genre in my list this month. This is a young adult like slasher book. There's a group of girls who are going to be seniors this year, and there is always something called like the senior scavenger hunt every August before school starts. Normally it takes place at the school where you get invited, and then you have to go find something in the school, and then everyone, like all the girls, have breakfast together. But this year they are actually having a scavenger hunt at a local amusement park that's like a horror haunted house themed amusement park. And once they get there, people start dying. And so they are, fighting for their lives and think that they're just doing this scavenger hunt. I liked it. It was young adult horror, so not super scary, fairly graphic for young adult. I thought it was fun. It was an easy read, and I'm glad that I got a chance to read it. If you're looking for a young adult slasher, check this one out. The next 4-star book I read was Cackle by Rachel Harrison. This is the second Rachel Harrison book that I've read. In this book, you are following Annie. She has recently broken up with her long-term boyfriend and has moved to a small town and gotten a teaching job in another town. One day, Annie meets a woman named Sophie, and they become friends. And Sophie is very well known around the town, but not necessarily well liked. Everyone in the town thinks that she is a witch, and so they are scared of her. And some of them warn Annie that maybe that's not the person that she wants to become friends with. I liked this book. Rachel Harrison does a lot of it's kind of like cozy horror, where it's not super cozy, it's not super scary. I haven't read very many witch books, so I'm glad that I picked this one up. I just saw it at the library and wanted to check it out, and so I did. My next 4-star book was Daisy Hates: The Great Undoing. This is the 4th book in the Magnolia Park series, and is the 2nd book where you are following Daisy. This one picks up, I think, 9 months to a year after the end of Daisy's last book. And it takes place along the same timeline as Magnolia Park's The Long Way Home. So far, out of the 4 Magnolia Parks books that I've read, this has been my least favorite. I don't really like Daisy that much as a character. And I don't really I don't like Daisy. I don't like her side of things. Also, again, in the Daisy Hates books, in Daisy's chapters, she has footnotes in the chapters, and that still just gets me, and it's very hard for me to read. I don't know, I don't like it that much. I still enjoyed it. Obviously, I gave it a 4-star, but all the other ones have been 4.5 or 5-star books, and this one it didn't I didn't enjoy it as much as the other books in this universe. My next 4-star book was Remnants of a Scarlet Flame by Cindy L. Sell. This is Cindy's debut novel. It is a high fantasy book. I was lucky enough to be one of her test readers, so I received an ARC of this book that stands for Advanced Reader Copy, and got to read it before it was published. It has been published now. I believe it came out on September 3rd. This was a very interesting book. I love fantasy books, and this one, parts of it reminded me of other fantasy I've read, and parts of it were nothing like anything I'd ever read. This is a very difficult book for me to explain because there's so much happening in it. You are following a world. There's a magic school, and the magic, mages are in very high regard, but there is a rebellion happening from another race that has basically been killed off. There's a rebellion happening. And so in this book, you're following a couple students from the magic school. You're following some of the people that are leading the rebellion in this city. And then you see what happens. I'm not explaining this well, but it was a really good book. If you like fantasy, especially like a high fantasy book, I highly recommend this one. I know that there is a second novella. I don't know if it's been published yet, if it's available yet, but there's a second novella that follows this book, and then there will be a sequel, at least a sequel. Obviously, it's not out yet because this book just came out last week. So, but I really liked it. I'm very thankful that I was able to get a copy before it was published, and I highly recommend if you're looking for a new fantasy book. My last 4-star book was The Dark Half by Stephen King. I had heard about this book a lot. I've read a lot of Stephen King books, but I have never read this one. So when I saw it at the library, I knew I had to pick it up. That's another book that it's in this jar somewhere because it's on the list of books that I want to read, but I didn't pull it out of here. So anyway, that doesn't matter. In this book, you are following Thad, who is a struggling author. He has had a few books published under his name, found success when he created the pen name George Stark and published books under that name. Well, someone found out his secret, and so he killed off George, but George maybe isn't as imaginary or as dead as Thad wants him to be. When I read this book, it reminded me a lot of, it seems to me that Stephen King got this idea when he killed off Richard Bachman, because in his early career, he would publish books under his name, but to publish more than one book a year, he published books under Richard Bachman as well, because the world just thought that he couldn't publish more than one book a year, I guess. And then he no longer writes as Richard Bachman. So to me, he's like, what would happen if Richard Bachman decided that he didn't want to stay, that he didn't want to go away, and he enjoyed that name. Anyway, I liked this book. It was old school Stephen King. I like a lot of Stephen King's work. This one is not like any of his other books that I've read. There was definitely still some graphic scenes in them, but I don't remember as much offensive material in this book as especially his early works tend to have. So if you're looking for something different from Stephen King, but you still want to read something by him, I suggest you check this one out. The one 4.5-star book I read in August was The Butterfly Garden by Dot Hutchison. This is a book that I had pulled out of my TBR jar, also a book that I own. It's on my Kindle. So I got something off my TBR list, and I got to put another book in the jar. In this book, you are following Maya. She is in a police station being interviewed by 2 policemen about where she's been. She has been missing for, I think, 2 years, and you find out where she's been, what happened to her. It's told through the detective's point of view, but also told through Maya's point of view. I listened to this one as an audiobook, and it was a really good audiobook. It's basically about a man who they call the gardener, who kidnaps women and holds them hostage in this garden of his. And Maya was one that was kidnapped and has been living there for 2 years until something happens and she is able to escape. I really liked this book. It was beautifully written. I didn't care for the twist in the end, which is why it got a 4.5 instead of a 5. But I really enjoyed it. I liked listening to it. I really, really enjoyed this book. It is part of a series. There's 4 total. I haven't looked into any of the other ones. I don't know what any of the other ones are about. I can't even remember the name of the second one. But I think that this book would be fine as a standalone. So, I don't know that I will check out the other books. Maybe eventually I will, but I enjoyed this one. I don't think it needs more. And yeah, if you're looking for like a mystery crime thriller with some horror thrown in, check this one out. My one and only 5-star book in the month of August was Loveless by Alice Oseman. I can't find my desk cover for this, so you'll just have to believe me that this says Loveless. You can't really see it. It's too washed out. It says it on the front right here. This is a book that I pulled out of the TBR jar and a book off of my shelf. So, again, get to shrink those shelves and fill up the jar some more. Like that. We always like that. In this book, you are following Georgia and her 2 friends. They are starting college. They are all in the same college, but this college has different houses for like what degree you're studying and everything like that. So she is in a different house than her 2 best friends are. So she has a roommate. She is trying to navigate her life away from her family and on her own for the first time, even with her friends there. This book is also hard to explain. I loved this book, obviously. I give it a 5-star, but it's hard to explain. So Georgia's in college. She signs up for clubs, and one of the clubs that she ends up putting her email address down for is the Pride Club. And she accidentally gets roped into going to one of the events, which sounds weird, but anyway. And she's questioning her sexuality, and she discovers that she may not be straight, and she didn't know. She didn't know that there was a name for her and how she felt about other people. Again, super hard to explain, but I loved this book. I read it so fast. Alice Oseman, it's beautiful writing. And even though it's young adult because it takes place, freshman year of college, but I loved all the characters. I loved the conflicts, the way that they were written, which sounds strange, but I don't know, I fell in love with the characters in this book, and I enjoyed the story, and I'm sad and I'm mad that it took me so long to read this. I've had this book for like 2 years, and I've never read it, and I really wish I had read it earlier or sooner, and this is a book that I can see myself reading again soon. I told my husband he should read it. I told my best friend she should read it. I understand why everyone loves this book now that I've actually read it, and so I encourage you to read this book too. Those are all the books that I read in August of 2024. A pretty good reading month. All of them were 4 stars or above. I had a 5-star. Can't be mad about that. So now I want to know, have you read any of these books? What did you think? All right, I'll talk to you later. Bye.